In 1916, the Abernathy family gathered for a portrait, a simple moment frozen in time. For over a century, it was just an old photograph. But when modern technology looked closer, it revealed something standing behind the mother, a silent guest in the portrait that proves not everyone in the frame was who they seemed. Dr. Evelyn Reed had seen thousands of old photographs cross her desk. As a digital archivist at the State Historical Museum, she specialized in bringing forgotten images back to life through careful restoration. Her days were spent scanning, cleaning, and preserving pieces of history that might otherwise crumble into dust. Most photographs told simple stories of ordinary people living ordinary lives. She never expected to find something that would shake her faith in what photographs could capture. The collection arrived on a cold Tuesday morning in March. Boxes upon boxes of documents, photographs, and personal effects from the defunct Oakhaven County Historical Society. The small-town organization had closed its doors after running out of funding, and their entire archive needed a new home. Dr. Reed methodically sorted through the materials, cataloging each item with professional precision. The Abernathy family portrait was tucked between a stack of land deeds and marriage certificates. At first glance, it appeared completely unremarkable. The photograph showed a typical family from the early 1900s. The father stood tall and stern on the left, his hand resting on the shoulder of his older son. Two boys, perhaps 8 and 12 years old, sat in chairs wearing their Sunday best. The mother, Mrs. Elara Abernathy, stood on the right side of the frame. Her expression carried a subtle sadness that was common in photographs from that era, when smiling for cameras was considered improper. Dr. Reed placed the photograph on her high-resolution scanner. The machine hummed quietly as it captured every detail of the aged paper and faded silver. As the digital image slowly rendered on her computer screen, she noticed something peculiar. There was a faint discoloration directly behind the mother, a smudge that seemed out of place in an otherwise clear photograph. Professional curiosity took hold. Dr. Reed zoomed in on the anomaly, adjusting the contrast and brightness to get a better look. What she saw made her lean back from her monitor in surprise. The smudge wasn't a defect in the photograph. It was something far more unsettling. The faint outline of a face hovered just behind Mrs. Abernathy's shoulder. The features were pale and slightly distorted, as if seen through water. The eyes were unnaturally wide and dark, staring directly at the camera with an intensity that made Dr. Reed's skin crawl. This wasn't a simple double exposure or photographic error. The face seemed integrated into the shadows of the image, as if it had always been there, waiting to be discovered. Dr. Reed's first thought was spirit photography. During the late 1800s and early 1900s, it was common for grieving families to commission photographers to create images that included their deceased loved ones. These portraits, known as memento mori, were meant to provide comfort and preserve the memory of those who had passed away. The practice was especially popular after the loss of children, when families desperate for one last photograph would pay handsomely for the service. She began researching the Abernathy family, diving into census records and local newspaper archives from Oakhaven County. The work was tedious but necessary. Each document revealed another piece of the family's story. John Abernathy was a successful farmer who owned substantial land outside the town. His wife Elara was known for her charitable work with the local church. Their sons, Thomas and William, attended the town's only school. Then Dr. Reed found what she was looking for. A brief obituary in the Oakhaven County Gazette dated just 3 weeks before the family portrait. 8-year-old Lily Abernathy had died of scarlet fever after a brief illness. The obituary described her as a bright and cheerful child who loved to sing hymns and help her mother with household chores. She was survived by her parents and 2 older brothers. The timeline made perfect sense. The Abernathys had lost their daughter and wanted to include her spirit in a final family portrait. Dr. Reed had solved similar mysteries before. Grieving families often sought ways to maintain connections with their deceased relatives, and spirit photography provided that bridge between the living and the dead. But something nagged at Dr. Reed's professional instincts. She had examined hundreds of spirit photographs, and they typically followed certain patterns. The ghostly figures were usually soft and ethereal, meant to suggest peace and comfort. The face behind Mrs. Abernathy was different. Its stare was too direct, too intense. There was nothing comforting about those wide, dark eyes. Dr. Reed decided to be thorough. She searched through school records and church registries, looking for any photograph of Lily Abernathy that she could use for comparison. After hours of digging through dusty archives, she found what she needed in a collection of school photographs from 1915. The image showed a class of young children posed in front of Oak Haven's schoolhouse. The teacher had written names on the back in careful script. There, in the second row, stood Lily Abernathy. Dr. Reed's blood ran cold as she compared the school photograph to the face in the family portrait. They weren't the same person. The girl in the school photo had round cheeks and bright eyes. Her hair was neatly braided, and she wore a simple dress with a lace collar. The face behind Mrs. Abernathy shared none of these features. The entity in the portrait was gaunt and pale, with sharp features that seemed almost predatory. Dr. Reed stared at her computer screen, trying to process what this meant. If the face in the portrait wasn't Lily Abernathy, then who was it? And how had it appeared in a photograph taken over a century ago? She shifted her investigation to the photographer, a man named Alistair Finch. His name was stamped in small letters at the bottom corner of the portrait. Research revealed that Finch had been a well-respected photographer in Oak Haven County. His studio on Main Street was known for quality work and reasonable prices. Families traveled from neighboring towns to have their portraits taken by him. But something had changed in Finch's life after 1916. His business declined rapidly, and he seemed to disappear from local records within months of taking the Abernathy portrait. Dr. Reed wondered what had happened to cause such a dramatic shift in his circumstances. The answer came in an unexpected place. Among the boxes from the Historical Society, Dr. Reed discovered a leather-bound journal with Alistair Finch's name embossed on the cover. The early entries read like a businessman's ledger, recording appointments, payments, and technical notes about his photographic process. The entries from early 1916 were routine and professional. Finch wrote about new equipment he had ordered and techniques he wanted to try. He seemed proud of his growing reputation and the steady stream of customers who sought his services. Then the tone changed dramatically. The entry dated 2 days before the Abernathy portrait session described an unusual dream. Finch wrote about feeling watched while working alone in his darkroom. He mentioned a persistent chill that seemed to follow him throughout his studio, even on warm days. The entry about the Abernathy session itself was barely legible. Finch's usually neat handwriting had become shaky and hurried. He described the family's arrival at his studio on a gray afternoon in late October. The father and sons seemed normal enough, but something was wrong with Mrs. Abernathy. She moved stiffly, almost mechanically, and her skin was unnaturally cold to the touch. During the session, she kept glancing at the empty space behind her, as if someone was standing there. When Finch asked if she was comfortable, she simply stared at him without responding. The children seemed nervous, fidgeting more than usual and avoiding eye contact with their mother. But the most disturbing part of the entry came when Finch described developing the photograph. As the image slowly appeared in the chemical bath, he noticed something that shouldn't have been there. A face materialized behind Mrs. Abernathy, clear and distinct despite no one standing in that position during the session. Finch wrote that he had not created any special effects. He had not attempted spirit photography or any double exposure techniques. The face had simply appeared on the photographic plate by itself, as if it had been present all along, invisible to the naked eye but somehow captured by the camera. The journal entries that followed became increasingly erratic and paranoid. Finch wrote about strange noises in his darkroom and equipment that moved on its own. He described seeing shadows in his peripheral vision that disappeared when he turned to look directly at them. Sleep became impossible as nightmares plagued his rest. 3 weeks after the Abernathy session, Finch made his final journal entry. His handwriting was barely controlled, the words scattered across the page in desperate scrawl. He wrote about the day of the photo shoot, providing details he had been too shaken to include in his earlier account. According to Finch, Mrs. Abernathy had arrived at the studio in a trance-like state. She spoke in whispers and seemed unaware of her surroundings. During the session, she repeatedly mentioned feeling someone standing behind her, someone who wanted to be in the photograph. When Finch assured her that no one was there, she simply smiled and said that he would understand soon enough. The final paragraph of the journal entry revealed the true horror of what had happened. Finch realized that the face in the photograph wasn't Lily Abernathy's spirit. It was something else entirely, something that had attached itself to the grieving family during their time of vulnerability. He wrote about how grief could open doors that should remain closed, creating spaces for things that had no business in the world of the living. The entry ended with a terrified warning. It wasn't their daughter's spirit. It was something they invited in through their grief. A parasite. It smiled at me from the negative. Now it's out of the picture. I see it in the corners of my house. Dr. Reed's hands trembled as she set down the journal. She immediately searched through newspaper archives for any mention of Alistair Finch's fate. The answer came in a brief article buried on page 3 of the Oakhaven County Gazette. Alistair Finch had been found dead in his studio 1 week after his final journal entry. The official cause of death was ruled suicide, though the article noted that neighbors had reported strange lights and sounds coming from the building in the days leading up to his death. His photographic equipment was found destroyed, as if someone had taken a hammer to every camera and lens in the studio. Dr. Reed sat back in her chair, trying to process the implications of what she had discovered. The Abernathy family portrait was not a memorial to their lost daughter. It was evidence of something far more sinister. In their grief over Lily's death, they had somehow become hosts to a malevolent entity that fed on their sorrow and despair. She pulled up the high-resolution scan of the portrait one final time. Now that she knew the truth, she could see details that had escaped her notice before. The face behind Mrs. Abernathy was not peaceful or comforting. Its expression was hungry and predatory, as if it was feeding on the family's pain. But the most chilling detail was in Mrs. Abernathy's eyes. Dr. Reed had initially interpreted her expression as simple sadness, the natural grief of a mother who had lost her child. Now she could see something else entirely. There was terror in those eyes, a desperate plea for help directed straight at the camera. Mrs. Abernathy had known something was wrong. She had tried to communicate her fear through the photograph, hoping that someday someone would understand her silent message. Dr. Reed wondered what had happened to the Abernathy family after the portrait was taken. Further research revealed that they had sold their farm within a month of the photography session and left Oakhaven County permanently. No records existed of where they had gone or what had become of them. It was as if they had simply vanished from history, leaving only the portrait as evidence they had ever existed. The photograph represented more than just a family memory. It was a warning, a record of what could happen when grief opened doors to things that should remain hidden. The Abernathy family had paid the ultimate price for their encounter with the entity, and their portrait served as their final testament to the horror they had experienced. As Dr. Reed carefully filed the portrait in the museum's collection, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was preserving more than just a historical artifact. She was maintaining a prison, keeping something contained within the boundaries of the photograph. The face behind Mrs. Abernathy continued to stare out from the image, its dark eyes holding secrets that history had tried to forget. If you found this story chilling, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more tales that history tried to forget. Let us know in the comments what you think you can see in the mother's eyes. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.